Welcome to Health Psychology
LSP508
course. We will be looking at
into Introduction to Health Psychology. This is Unit 1. Covering in this unit is the definition of health psychology, body relationship, a brief history of that, the rise of biopsychosocial method, the need for health psychology, and what is health psychology training for. Now let's get into looking at what the definition of health psychology is. Health psychology basically focuses on the especially in relation to health issues, health conditions. Now, we know that some people having some health conditions, they remain to practice. And we also know that there are some people who may become ill, and the response towards illness can aggravate, make the illness worse, better. So basically, health psychology looks at health and wellness in relation to the mental well-being. So the interaction of the mind and the body. So health, mind is the complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, mind as the optimum state of health. Now, focus of health psychologists is mainly to look into the health promotion and maintenance, prevention and treatment of illness, etiology and correlates of health, illness and dysfunction, origins or causes of illness. Of the healthcare system and formulation of health policy is also something that the health psychologists focus on. Now let's go into looking at the mind and body link, as I've mentioned earlier. When we look at the mind and body framework, there are the biofactors, biological factors, there are the psychological factors, and there are the social factors. The biofactors, viruses, bacteria, and genetics. The psychological factors include behavior, choices, norms, and coping, including pain. And the social factors include socioeconomic status, stress level, social support, available resources, and access to healthcare. Now, the interaction of all these three factors basically contributes to whether the illness improves or deteriorates. And to understand conditions of individual, these now let's go into the mind and body relationship, a brief history of how it all began. Was considered to arise when evil spirits entered the body. And early theories, especially the humoral theory of illness, looked at the functions of the main humors, main fluids circulating in the body, which are the blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. And the theory explains that when there is an imbalance in these four fluids, that would actually result in some impairment in the mental health. For example, when there is an imbalance of the blood level in the body, temperament issues can result from that. Black bile, if there is an imbalance, that can result in sadness or can result in angry disposition, and phlegm can result in perhaps a more laid-back approach to life, which is daily life activities, for example. So imbalances in these can result in some level of mental and physical health condition in individuals. So that's what the early the humoral theory explains that. And disease in the Middle Ages was seen as God's punishment. When we move towards the Renaissance period up to the present day, medicine is understood more in terms of the technical basis, where studies and laboratory findings were looked into to look at bodily factors, yeah, and diagnosis were mainly focused on organic and cellular pathology. And as it moved, mainly in the localization of cells in the body, and then 17th century focused more on tissue pathology, where studies were looking into cells and the effects of multiplication in certain tissues, in cell tissues, using microscopes. So these laboratory findings were focused at, and then you've got the 19th century, cell biology as being the basic element. And later on, yeah, it gave rise to these different theories listed here. Magic bullet theory looks at there is only one short cure for all illness. So given one form of medication or one form of treatment can cure all types of illness. So that was the magic bullet theory. Then you've got the germ theory. The germ theory basically explains that germs at cell level causes illness. And of course, then the emergence of the biomedical model, which focuses mainly on the biological. Why is the biomedical model actually at present? It reduces illness to low-level processes such as disordered cells and chemical imbalances. That means it looks at illness of imbalance in chemical, or if there is a disordered cell. Yeah, so it doesn't explain further to illness. Fails to recognize social and psychological process or as powerful influences over bodily as dualism, a mind and body dualism, which means the mind and the body is separate, which is not the reality of how illnesses work, and emphasizes illness over health rather than focusing on behaviors that promote. Mainly looking at illness and how to cure the illness, but not for health promotion, which is mainly the current focus for current status of health in the world. And model cannot address many puzzles that face practitioners. Why, for example, some people are exposed to flu virus, but only some of them develop flu. Why is that so? So these are not looked into when we focus on these. And previously, conversion is example of studies mainly that looked into the medical model. Yeah, in the past, Sigmund Freud, father of psychoanalysis, he mentioned that convergent hysteria is a result of repressed psychological conflicts or repressed sexual conflicts. Yeah? And he also described some conditions like Bell palsy as being, there is no physical cause to symptoms. Yeah? Why some people have Bell palsy, but there is no any physical findings of why a person acquired such a condition. Could it be due to the psychological impact? Now that was not looked into, right? And there was a case of Dora who lost her abilities to speak without any physical condition or physical findings, right? So these gave rise to the psychosomatic medicine. So psychosomatic medicine is looking at soma, which is the body, and psyche, which is the mind. So body and mind medicine. Now the psychosomatic medicine looks out of that on their overall health, including physical health. So the criticism is that conflict or personality type is not sufficient to produce illness. There is conflict that cannot be objective. When we talk about conflict, it can't be objectively measured or verified. So from the psychosomatic, it has moved to the biopsychosocial model. Now, the biopsychosocial model looks into biological, psychological, psycho, and social aspects. Health and illness are consequence of the interplay of the biological, psychological, and social factors. The advantages of this model is that individual and society continually interact to influence health and illness. How we view health and illness affected by these three factors. And it also emphasizes both on health and illness, including promotion of health. So the clinical implication of biopsychosocial model is that the process of diagnosis can benefit from understanding the interacting role of these three components. Of the relationship between patient and practitioner is also which can help to improve the patient's use of services, and rapidity with which the illness then gets to be resolved. Biopsychosocial model, the case, let's look at the very occur in Southeast Asia, especially mind and body are actually intertwined in health. There were sudden nocturnal deaths, that means death in sleep, among male refugees and these deaths occur in the first few hours of sleep. Now, autopsies were done and revealed no specific cause of death. When the autopsies were done also, there was findings of genetic susceptibility in which perhaps these deaths could be a result of genetic predisposition. And further findings looked into whether victims were overwhelmed by cultural differences, because there were refugees who had to move from one location to another, from one culture to another. There were language barriers, also difficulty finding satisfactory jobs. So this definitely increased in these victims. And they also found that perhaps this could be the reason why these nocturnal deaths occur. Now, immediate trigger can also be due to violence or even family arguments or issues, even frightening dreams. These can be immediate triggers of the nocturnal deaths. That is why the need for health psychology emerges. And why is there a need to look into health and psychology together using the biopsychosocial is to understand how to manage health, especially in terms of acute and chronic illnesses, promotion of knowledge and advancement in technology and research, expansion of healthcare services, as well as to have a more increased medical acceptance and adherence among patients. And moving on at the changes in death patterns around the world, initially from the 19th century or 19,000s, most diseases were acute, were short period of diseases that resulted in death or mortality. And the causes were tuberculosis and gastrointestinal infections. These were the main causes of mortality in the 19,000s. But at present, it has moved more into the pattern of chronic illnesses, heart disease being the very main cause of death or mortality around the world, cancer being the second. Now, how about COVID-19 being the very recent illness that affected majority of the population. That's for a thought for you to think about. Now, if you look at the changes in death patterns as well, the highest is the ischemic heart disease, and then followed by pneumonia, and then cerebrovascular disease, as well as transport or accidents. These are also the main death patterns. This is reported in the Department of Statistics Malaysia for the main or principal causes of death in Malaysia. And of course, the neoplasm or trachea or bronchial lung infections are also among the main causes of death in Malaysia. Now, death rates over the years dropped due to infectious disease because of the advancement of antibiotics and healthier behaviors of individuals. So, now short-lived and curable, whereas the chronic conditions are incurable and also the main focus in health psychology. So chronic illnesses are preventable, especially if the adherence to medication increases, for example, diabetes, adherence to taking insulins. The diet, when better diet, that could also prevent chronic illness. Stop smoking, for example, exercise, and also limitations that can reduce car accidents or even self-inflicted gun shots are some of the things that can be preventable for chronic illnesses. At these points here, 10% is medical care, 20% is genetics, 40% is behavior, and 30% is other factors. So as you can see, the 40% is behavior of individuals. Now, chronic conditions can be improved if the behavior and adherence of so this is something that we could do in class for us to brainstorm on the biopsychosocial model. Into the theory, understanding of theory. Theory is basically a set of statements, provides guidelines for how to do research and intervention. It also generates specific predictions that can be tested and modified, and tie together any loose ends in understanding a particular phenomenon. Experiments are also used or conducted, and the main experiments within psychology, health psychology, are by looking at two or more different conditions, and individuals are assigned random their reactions towards particular. Method is called randomized controlled trials, where it is conducted to evaluate treatment or interventions and their effectiveness over time. And as well as health psychology is evidence-based medicine. Medical interventions that go through rigorous testing and evaluation of the benefits before it becomes a standard of care. So it is very important that evidence-based medicine or practices are applied in health psychology, especially in prevention and promotion of health. Now, correlational studies are other methods that are done. This is to measure whether a change in one variable corresponds with a change in another variable. The advantage of this is it's difficult to determine the direction of causality. Advantage over experiment is that it can be adaptable versus experiments where it can be challenging to conduct trials in few rounds, for example. So correlation study is much more not as complex as experimental methods. And then of course there is the prospective research. Prospective research, basically, as its word says, prospective, looks forward in time to see how groups of people change over time, relate variables changes over time, and it is conducted to understand the risk factors that relate to health condition. So a longitudinal study is an example or a form of prospective research in which same people or groups of people are observed at multiple points in time. Then we've got also the retrospective design that is used as well. This is to look backward in time in an attempt to reconstruct the condition, and this is what led to what is happening at present. So critical risk factors are identified. For example, for development of AIDS, to find out what are the factors of development of AIDS. So this is an example that is. And the role of epidemiology in health psychology. Now, epidemiology is the study of frequency or distribution and causes of infectious and non-infectious disease in population. Now, in health psychology, it is very important to understand the pattern illnesses, and the epidemiology also provides us the mortality and morbidity. So morbidity is number of cases of disease that exist at some given time or point. It is very important to look at these patterns to understand how we can develop promotion or prevention of health conditions. Into the methodological tools. Now, the tools of neuroscience, for example, fMRI or functional magnetic resonance imaging, are used, for example, to provide a glimpse into the brain to see, for example, what is the effects of certain behaviors, to understand the action and the cause of that action, looking into the pattern of activity in the brain. This knowledge of autonomic neuroendocrine and immune systems. Mobile and wireless technologies are also currently used. Psychological momentary interventions. So, for example, devices, mobile or applications or wireless technologies that are used to remind patients to take in their medication, for example, or even another example is the ambulatory blood pressure monitoring device, where patients can monitor their own blood pressure levels. So these are some of the mobile and wireless technologies that are used. And then, of course, meta-analysis. Meta-analysis basically looks at combining results from different studies to identify to reduce chances of irritable bowel syndrome. So meta-analysis is a combination of several studies looking into that, looking into how to reduce or prevention or prevention of the irritable bowel syndrome condition. So a combination of that study will provide more evidence-based findings and understanding of how to prevent or manage irritable bowel syndrome. Psychology training for. It is mainly for healthcare practitioners, social work, occupational therapy, dietetics, therapy, public health, academic research, and private practice. So in these areas, these are mainly or uses the functions of health psychology within these areas. And then, of course, management of healthcare system in the healthcare organizations, as well as treatment settings to look into, and occupational health settings as well. Just some self-tests for you to try out. To look into research in health psychologies, especially experimental and correlational in nature, and to give one disadvantage of these methods. 1.2, which is the systems of the body. Now, this area is just to give an overview of some of our systems in the body to have a better understanding when we further go into prevention and promotion of health. We will cardiovascular system, respiratory system, digestive system, renal system, reproductive, and as well as the genetics and health and immune system. And the physical body of human. The main components are the nervous system. Now, the nervous system is split from into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. For the central nervous system, it is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord. And for the peripheral nervous system, it is comprised of the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, split two. And then under the autonomic nervous system, it is split to parasympathetic nervous system. For the somatic nervous system, it is basically the nervous system that controls voluntary movement, and the autonomic nervous system is organs that operate involuntarily. We will look into the examples. And under the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system basically mobilizes the body for action, and the other one maintains or restores equilibrium or balances the body. Now, the brain, which is the central nervous system, are comprised of different lobes, different areas. The main lobes are the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe. As you can see here, there are other parts of the brain, the motor cortex, the auditory cortex. Motor is for the motor functioning of the body, auditory is for the cerebellum, which functions to balance the body. And other parts, the thalamus, the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is usually in functioning or regulation of temperature, regulation of thirst and hunger. Of course, we've got the pons, which is for the sleep-wake cycle. Corpus callosum, that corpus callosum basically is like a bridge between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. Hindbrain and the midbrain. So the hindbrain comprises of medulla, pons, and cerebellum. As I've mentioned, the medulla regulates the heart rate, blood pressure, respiration. The pons helps to control respiration, and the cerebellum is for balance or equilibrium, muscle tone as well as posture. So, for example, walking down the street and suddenly there is a crack in this at the bottom of the street, and our body would tend to sway a little when we get our feet in the crack, but somehow we are able to balance back and stand on a proper position back. So why does this occur? Is because of the cerebellum. The cerebellum helps to balance our body movement. And then the midbrain is responsible for coordination of visual and auditory reflexes. Brain comprises of thalamus, hypothalamus, and cerebral cortex, which I've already mentioned the functions earlier for hunger, thirst, temperature. Yes, and the limbic system comprises of amygdala, hippocampus. These are functional in the role of stress and responses. So amygdala detects any threat. Amygdala also functions for fear, anxiety, and threat. And hippocampus mainly for emotionally charged memories. So, for example, a death in a family member that had occurred, for example, that the hippocampus basically remembers these emotionally charged memories. Now, there can be some of the disorders of the nervous system. Epilepsy is a form of a disorder in the nervous system. Cerebral palsy, as well as Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, all these, Huntington disease, all has a relation to do with the spinal cord and the brain. Polio, paraplegia, quadriplegia, and dementia as well. Now, the endocrine system, as mentioned earlier, comprises of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland basically secretes different hormones to the body, which can affect the other glands. And in this image, you can see the different types of glands in our body: the thyroid gland, the parathyroids, the adrenal gland, the thyroid, and of course the sex hormones are secreted in the sex organs, the testes, and the ovaries. The endocrine system basically secretes these hormones so that it can stimulate changes if there is, the blood can stimulate changes in these target organs. And the pituitary gland is basically a pituitary lobe that has the anterior and posterior. The front is anterior and the posterior is the back of the pituitary lobe. Now, these adrenal glands, mainly the function is in relation to response to stress. So when there is stress that occurs, the adrenal gland within the sympathetic nervous system to secrete stress hormones, which are called corticosteroids, and these corticosteroids are released in the cortex. And then the adrenal medulla does the regulation of the epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline. So I'm sure you've heard of the term adrenaline rush. So this blood pressure, breathing rate, and digestion, as well as the pupil dilation of the pupils of the eyes. Now, disorders involving the endocrine system, diabetes is one of it. The body becomes incapable of manufacturing or properly producing using insulin. So there are two types of diabetes type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is an autoimmune disorder that is genetics and genetically predisposed, and then you've got the type 2 diabetes which is a result of lifestyle. And briefly, the heart has different parts and functions as well. Left ventricle, and then the right atrium and the right ventricle. So the left atrium and left ventricle basically takes the oxygenated lung and pumps it out to the aorta. And then you've got the right atrium and right ventricle, which pumps the blood back into the lungs through the pulmonary artery. The cardiac cycle, which is the regular rhythmic phase of contraction and relaxation of the heart. Phases include systole and diastole. Some of the cardiovascular system is atherosclerosis, in which the arteries are narrowed by plaques which are formed by deposits of cholesterol and other substances. Angina pectoris is also a form of cardiovascular disorder, and this heart having insufficient supply of oxygen or adequate removal of carbon dioxide and other waste products, resulting in chest pain on exertion, and the myocardial infarction, which is clogged in a coronary vessel blocking the flow of the blood to the are characterized by lack of blood flow of oxygen to the heart muscle. It's also a form of cardiovascular system disorder. And congestive heart failure is a result of it, which is the heart having inadequate delivery of oxygen-rich blood. And arrhythmia is irregular beating of the heart, leading to loss of consciousness and sudden death. Rheumatic fever can also occur, which is a bacterial infection that originates in connective tissues. That exerts against the blood vessel wall, highest during systole and lowest during diastole, by the cardiac output, peripheral resistance, structure of the arterial walls. Blood comprises of plasma. These plasma contains plasma proteins, electrolytes, and substances that is transported by the blood. And then, of course, the blood also has cells, for example, the white blood cells, lymphocytes, and red blood cells, as well as the platelets. The platelets, they block small holes that develop in blood vessels and play an important role in blood clotting. Now, if there is a dysfunction of this, if there is no blood clotting, that can cause further blood loss, which can result in death. Of course, the respiratory system, as we know, it brings in oxygen through inspiration. The lung expands inside the thorax and then eliminates carbon dioxide through expiration, where it reduces the lung volume in the thorax. Right, and the left lung, and of course, oxygen from inhaled air passes through these alveoli walls, which is in. There are also disorders associated with respiratory system, for example, hay fever, viral bacterial infections, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, pneumonia, and pleurisy, as well as lung cancer. The digestive system, what are the functions include? The functions of the digestive system includes gastric secretions to the stomach to help with digestion of food, enzymes in small intestines, they break down proteins. Large intestines stores food residue and helps in the reabsorption of water. Entry of feces also into the rectum leads to the expulsion of solid waste. Some of the disorders of the digestive system include gastroesophageal reflux disease, gastroenteritis, diarrhea, and dysentery, peptic ulcers, appendicitis, as well as hepatitis. So these are some of the disorders of the digestive system. Now let's look into the renal system, which is the urinary system. The renal system includes the kidney, ureters, and the urinary bladder. From the image earlier, you'll see the kidney regulate body liquids, and the which then helps to maintain water balance in the body, blood pH, and electrolyte balance. The ureters would remove or urine to the bladder, and the urinary bladder is the reservoir for urine. Urethra then conducts urine from the bladder out of the body. So some of the disorders of the renal system include urinary tract infections or UTI, glomerular nephritis, tubular necrosis, kidney failure, which is the failure of the kidney to function, which could require artificial kidney. Now, kidney dialysis functions in cleaning the blood to remove excess salts and water or any other metabolites. Now let's go into the reproductive system, the male and female reproductive system. Mainly the penis, the urethra, the testes, the scrotum, gland, yeah, and the female reproductive system includes the fallopian tube, uterus, cervix, and vagina. So they have ovums, which is produced each month by one ovary, and it develops into human being if it becomes fertilized by the sperm. Out if it's not fertilized. Estrogen is produced also in the ovaries. It develops secondary sexual characteristics, as the white hips. So these are some of the sexual characteristics of female. And progesterones produced during the second half of the menstrual cycle. This estrogen and progesterones basically regulate the menstrual cycle. And declines of progesterones can result in pregnancy failures. Now the testes produces testosterone hormones, and it produces sperm. The sperm, if passed through the uterus into the fallopian tube, ovum, which then develops into human being. And also testes develop secondary sexual characteristics such as beard, development of beard, or they cause poise of the male, as well as hairs, so the male characteristics. Now the disorders of the reproductive systems, for example, sexually transmitted diseases, STI, chronic pelvic inflammatory disease, this is more. Cancer. Cancer can be testicle cancer, can be breast cancer, can be ovary cancer, and of course disorders of the menstrual cycle, premenstrual disorders, and fertility. So genetics and health plays a very important role. As mentioned earlier, the biological part plays a very important role when we want to look into understanding why certain health conditions develop. So sex hormones determine biological sex, X chromosome by the mother, Y by the father. There are several types of research that had demonstrated whether a characteristic is genetically acquired or not, and findings, especially with studies with families, twin studies, or even adoption studies, have looked into this, and findings have showed that there is a high contribution of genetics when it comes to certain conditions. And the immune system is also important because it helps to regulate infection. So infection causing microbes that can spread through direct transmission, indirect transmission, biological transmission, or mechanical transmission. And infection also produces a number of organisms of virulence, and it also depends on the body's defensive capacities to fight these organisms of virulence. And the cause is incubation period, and then of course the non-specific symptom period and acute phase. Acute phase is a short period. Non-specific symptom period is unidentified symptom period. Now, immunity is the body's resistance to invading organisms. Natural immunity is acquired through disease. When there is a infection, for example, the body develops cells to fight these invading organisms. And also, natural immunity can be passed from the mother to child at birth or through breastfeeding. And artificial immunity is acquired through vaccinations. So getting vaccinations are forms of body resistance that is artificial, that helps to invade any organisms. Now, there are non-specific immune mechanisms in immunity. General sets of response to any kind of infection or disorders is the non-specific immune mechanism. Ways of occurring is through the anatomical barriers, phagocytosis, antimicrobial substances, or inflammatory responses. So these can develop non-specific immune mechanisms. And specific immune mechanisms are usually acquired after birth or when fighting particular microorganisms and their toxins. Now, Under the immunity, the and cell-mediated immunity is what we're going to look at. Humoral immunity is as a result of the B lymphocytes. They confer immunity by the production and secretion of antibodies. So they are produced to fight these microorganisms. These B lymphocyte is under humoral immunity. Then we've got the cell-mediated immunity, which is the T lymphocytes. These would kill invading organisms and infected cells. And of course, the lymphatic system, which is the drainage system of the body. This would remove any invading organisms. So the disorders related to immune systems are, for example, lupus. This leads to chronic inflammation. Tonsillitis is also a form of infection. Infectious mononucleosis, lymphoma, and another type of autoimmunity, which is the body attacks its own tissues. So autoimmune diseases like arthritis, for example, is an autoimmune disease. So that's about for Unit 1, and I will see you again in Unit 2. Thank you.